I'm sure that the Minister, as he listens to this debate, will know that there is some things that have to be repeated. And perhaps by the number of times after members from Northern Ireland have spoken, maybe it will indeed affect his thinking and that of the department. Because I must confess, my Lords, that the statutory instrument before us today is, in my humble opinion, and I have a right to it, a disgrace to any government. Forcing all primary schools in Northern Ireland, including faith schools, to teach girls that they have a right to an abortion and telling them how to get one without their parents finding out, even if they are underage, is unbelievable in what is supposed to be a democratic society. I strongly object to the Secretary of State's decision to force this legislation and make it illegal for schools to tell pupils that abortion ends the life of an unborn child. Does it? Or does it not? The Secretary of State seeks to defend his actions by stating the basis for the Relationships and Sexuality Regulations Northern Ireland 2023 comes from Section 9.1 of the Executive Formation Act 2019 that requires the Secretary of State to impose abortion liberalisation on Northern Ireland. But, my Lords, this present legislation suffers from what I believe is the same constitutional problem as pertained to the abortion regulations. We are dealing with the lives of young people, and teachers are ordered by law to play a part in the destruction of a life, even against their own personal conviction and religious belief. And that part is by the instruction which they're supposed to give. Now, this issue pertains to matters that are devolved, yet the Secretary of State finds himself incapable of interfering in other issues. For example, we have major problems in Northern Ireland with the long hospital waiting lists. Some people are dying because of them. But can the Secretary of State feel that he should involve himself in that? No. Or stop the cutting of 300 nurse training places, which will leave the elderly and the weakest in society without essential care. Can he intervene, or will he? No. Or providing for the urgent educational needs of vulnerable children, or ensuring a province that has been plagued with a continuing disciplinary terrorist threat has adequate police numbers to face the challenge and keep the community safe. But we're told those numbers are going to decrease rather than increase, whilst they're increasing in the rest of the United Kingdom. Yes, the list is long, and yet the Secretary of State refuses to make what he calls major policy decisions in the absence of an executive. Now, if he did, he says, it would look remarkably like direct rule. And that is something, he says, he'd be very wary of. But today's regulations is a major interference in the lives of the people of Northern Ireland and has the responsibility of a devolved administration. But he can't do anything about any of those other things. But this is put beyond them all. In my opinion, again, such hypocrisy. Because in actual fact, the more he forces upon Northern Ireland community legislation like this one before us today, the further he hinders the pathway to the restoration of an executive. There's no more important issue than that of life and death of the unborn. And this legislation has been forced upon Northern Ireland by a government that is not one member of Parliament elected by the people of Northern Ireland. Indeed, it is good to remember that not one, as my noble Lord Morrow said, not one Northern Ireland Member of Parliament that takes their seats in the democratically elected House of Commons voted for Section 9 of the Executive Formation Act 2019.
My Lord, would my Lord...
Yes.
Thank you very much, my Lord, for giving way, and I agree with what he's saying and what particularly the noble lady said earlier. His point about no elected member from the government party from Northern Ireland, is it not even worse that we could end up in a year's time with a Labour government that actually doesn't even allow their members in Northern Ireland to stand for election, and yet they profess very strongly to be interested in Northern Ireland?
I think that the noble lady has made the point very clearly and is beyond challenge, because the fact is that the Labour Party does not permit their members to stand in Northern Ireland, and so therefore they could not have an elected representative in the other chamber, and yet they want to impose their will upon the people of Northern Ireland. The insertion of Section 9 was deeply controversial, and I believe a majority of the people of Northern Ireland find it an offensive amendment for which there was no prior consultation or proper scrutiny, and was added to a bill that was supposed to be subject matter to the formation of an executive. And yet they brought that legislation through. In actual fact, not only did they bring it through, but they did it having presented it on a narrow basis, and it was then deemed appropriate to be granted accelerated passage. The present situation, as the noble Lord Morris says, and these regulations is an even more anti-democratic and intolerable situation. As other noble lords have pointed out, the Secretary of State decided these regulations on education provision regarding abortion and reducing teen pregnancy was not even worthy of having any consultation. What kind of a democratic society are we living in? Then even the people are not worthy of consultation. These regulations are being imposed over the heads of parents without being preceded by any primary legislative debate in terms of the regulation-making powers as it's applied to education whatsoever. Indeed, the Secretary of State has not even bothered to consult or even give himself the semblance of democratic cover before forcing this legislation through. That is arrogance. My Lords, as I have said, the democratic deficit in relation to these regulations is even worse than that relating to abortion. And in spite that when the abortion regulations were taken to the court, the point was made that the Secretary of State had consulted on them, and that the court stated that in the event that regulations or directions were made in the future to deal with those issues of education and sexual and reproductive health, etc., then the court stated, then there will be an opportunity for the Secretary of State to carry out a consultation. Now, whenever the NIO was asked about consultation, was it necessary? The response was, no, it's not. Why would you talk to them? Why would you talk to those people? It's not necessary. Because each school must have a written policy on how it will deliver regulations on sexuality education, and that this policy should be subject to consultation with parents. Now, the House of Lords Committee, Secondary Legislation Scrutiny Committee, pointed out that school policies will only be able to operate within the already established government guidance, meaning that such consultation is too late to affect the framework of RSC delivery. It is noted, however, that when comparable regulations were introduced in England, a full consultation was carried out. I wonder, was that because the elected members in the other place would have to answer to their electorate? Maybe that was the reason. Because the electorate had the power to change them or to remove them, but not in Northern Ireland. Of course, our Secretary of State feels parents in Northern Ireland are too far down the pecking order to be worthy of being heard or consulted with. But, my lords, this is contrary to the European Convention of Human Rights, because the Convention states, and I quote, "In the exercise of any function which it assumes in relation to education and to teaching, the state, not might, but the state shall respect the rights of parents to ensure such education and teaching is in conformity with their own religious and philosophical conviction." Notice the word shall. But it hasn't been done. My lords, what we are witnessing is a deliberate abuse of parliamentary procedure in the developing of these regulations. And I ask the Minister, as he listens to the debate today, and the delight of what he's hearing, what is he going to do to stop any Secretary of State abusing the powers which they feel that they have over the people in Northern Ireland? Now, the Northern Ireland Secretary of State and CEDAW have demonstrated a total lack of respect for faith, which is very important to many in Northern Ireland. Now, paragraph 43 of the CEDAW report states, and I quote, "The designated members observed that young people in Northern Ireland were denied the education necessary to enjoy their sexual and reproductive health and rights. Most children in Northern Ireland attend denominational schools, either Catholic or Protestant." But, my lords, that's not true. It's not true. But then, of course, does truth really matter? Seemingly it doesn't. Because in actual fact, that statement is totally false. They go on to say that church representatives play active roles in school management boards, and the result that relationship and sexuality education, although recommended part of the primary and post-primary statutory curriculum of the Department of Education, is underdeveloped or non-existent, since it is at the school's discretion to implement the contents of the curriculum according to its values and ethos. So what they're saying is this. On the one hand, they say that the schools are either Catholic or Protestant. And then they go on to tell us that the contents of the curriculum is according to the schools, it's at the school's discretion to have a curriculum according to its values and ethos. Where relationship and sexuality education is delivered, they say, it is frequently provided by third parties and based on anti-abortion and abstinence ethos. Now, noble lords, this attack on Northern Ireland's churches as the heart of the educational problem lacks any sense of human rights balance or cognizance that the religious freedom is also a human right, let alone any appreciation of the important and constructive role churches have played in relation to education, including RSE. Just because they are supposed to be called a human rights body, that does not excuse their lack of concern for religious liberty. Religious liberty and freedom was hard fought for and obtained, and cost many a life. And the rights to religious freedom, or their stunning failure to attempt to understand faith ethos, beggars belief. You see, it seems that the Northern Ireland office and CEDAW are unaware of Article 2 of Protocol 1 of the ECHR. And I quote, "No person shall be denied the right of education. In the exercise of any functions which it assumes in relation to education and to teaching, the state shall respect the right of parents to ensure such education and teaching is in conformity with their own religious and philosophical conviction." There certainly has been no attempt to respect these rights when one considers the lack of consultation with parents. The attitude of the department in the explanatory memorandum exposes the ignorance of the department's human rights obligation under Article 2, Protocol number 1. They say, "Timing for the department to make regulations about the circumstances in which a pupil may be exercised or excused from receiving education on the updated curriculum is a matter for the department. There is no guarantee that this will be in place by January 2024, the point at which the department is under a duty to issue guidance to schools on the content and delivery of the updated curriculum. This may attract criticism," they say, "from faith-based schools and some teachers and parents." But it seems to be, so let it be. Who are they? However, it is our assessment, they say, that education should be delivered in a way that informs children of contraception, the legal right to an abortion in Northern Ireland, and how relevant service may be assessed, without advocating a particular view on the moral ethical considerations. My Lord, this statement exposes the total lack of concern for people who hold deep convictions of faith. It is to be noted that the RSC guidance from the department in England acknowledged the role of religion and belief in our RSC, including in the content of the teaching, highlighting the importance of taking account of the religious background of pupils, as well as affirming that all schools may teach about faith perspectives. And I quote, "All schools may teach about faith perspectives. In particular, schools with a religious character may teach the distinctive faith perspectives on relationships, and balanced debate may take place about issues that are seen as contentious. For example, the school may wish to reflect on faith teaching about certain topics, as well as how their faith institutions may support people in relationships and sex." I would suggest, if you look at the attendance at churches in England or in any other part of the United Kingdom, it is much less than Northern Ireland. Religion has a vital part to play. And in actual fact, their faith has kept them going when days were dark and the terrorist bombs and guns were being pointed at their families and their loved ones, and they were being murdered. And faith kept them going. And yet, as far as the NIO is concerned, that doesn't really count. In fact, the guidance in English promotes a whole school approach, setting RSE within the context of a school's broader ethos and approach to developing pupils socially, morally, spiritually, and culturally, and its pastoral care system. Can I ask the Minister, how does the Secretary of State value school ethos as a holistic, whole-person approach to education, which promotes the physical, social, emotional, intellectual, moral, and spiritual development of young people? And what consideration has been placed upon school ethos or parental rights within this statutory instrument. In conclusion, I believe what has been proposed is, as some others have said, indoctrination, not education. As a number of others have also stated, it's a deliberate government enforcement of their diktat, and it certainly is not worthy of a Conservative government. The result of this legislation will add to the thousands of unborn babies and leave many young girls emotionally scarred for the rest of their lives. Of course, those who have presented these regulations and supported will be nowhere to be found. No, to pick up the pieces of these distraught young people. But it will be left to many within the church community to reach out the hand of love and care while others walk away. I hope this government feels, and those that are supporting them, I hope they feel proud of what they're doing on the people of Northern Ireland.